Well, good afternoon again, and I'm so pleased to be with you all. And I kind of thought about this before I arrived, and I said, well, there are going to be some people there in the audience that I know. But I had no idea that there'd be so many folk in the audience that I not only know, but have differing kinds of relationships with, professional and personal, and thank all of you all for being here and for supporting the museum. Now, the way we kind of set this up, to the extent to which we set it up, this is going to be kind of like a jazz performance, improvisational, so to speak, because we didn't have a whole lot of opportunity to really plan together, because Dr. Matthews has so many obligations and is involved in representing us in so many quarters. But I'm going to show you a couple of things that she did, because I think you'll be able to see them a little bit more here.
Actually, this one.
Oh, it's
Isn't
that.
Isn't that
Oh,
weird?
that is the. Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay, and the first one is the pointer. Okay. So let's see. At the top, you can see our mission statement there, and you see the building, and you can see. Oh, yeah. That's it. Okay. And right here, this is the Brooks diagram of the late 18th century slave trading vessel that Dr. Matthews was referring to. And let's see, is this? Yeah. And here you see that same section of the memorial to the anonymous Africans there. And this gives you a closer view of what the stones are like, and the reliefs, and those are images that represent people there. Let's just go back, and so that's what you have just seen. Okay, so let's go right here. So we want to do at least three things in this museum. We want to place the African American experience in the larger framework of Atlantic history and world history. And we argue that you really cannot fully appreciate the African American experience unless you look at its connections to the larger world. And so wherever we can make those connections to international developments, we do that. And that's a process that's ongoing, and we're going to flesh that out much more completely as we institute different kinds of programming, as we have changing exhibits, and so on and so forth. But in addition, we want everyone who comes to the museum to leave with an understanding that in critically important ways, the African American experience has shaped not only American history, but critically important international events and developments too. This is not just a story that is parochial. When people think of African American history, they automatically think of the American South, the Great Migration to northern cities and western cities, and civil rights, and that's really about it. But actually, all of those elements, all of those phases have important international connections, and each one of those elements, the South, the Great Migration, and so on and so forth, can be linked to important developments in international and world history that African Americans had an impact on. And then the final thing that we want people to take away from the museum is this. Regardless of who you are, regardless of your racial background, this is your story also. This story touches your life, and it has had an impact, and it shaped your life. And so we want to accomplish all of those things. Now, what I want to do this afternoon is talk a bit about some of the themes that unfold inside of the museum that Dr. Matthews has described. And again, I'm not going to go through all the galleries because we have a lot of galleries, but I just want to give you all some examples to illustrate what I've just said and what you're going to see going forward. Okay, so you have an image basically of the Caribbean, and the first thing that I want to point out to y'all is right here, the island formerly known as Hispaniola, where you've got the Dominican Republic and Haiti there today. Okay, so we're going to focus there first, and then we'll go forward. Okay. And here you have someone that most of y'all are familiar with, Toussaint Louverture, one of the main architects of the Haitian Revolution, 1791 to 1804. Critically important, and among the several things that happened there, two are unprecedented even today in world history. One, Haiti, formerly known as Saint-Domingue. This is the only place where these two things happen. One, people held in slavery liberated themselves and became free, fully free. But they also simultaneously cast off colonialism. The French controlled Saint-Domingue, this part of the island of Hispaniola. So they became free from slavery and also successfully overthrew imperialism. And this is the only example in world history where people so shackled liberated themselves from both. Take a look and you will see, I think, something particularly interesting in terms of international events. And we'll look at it in this way, and then we'll look at it in another way. Oh. Okay. So this one, okay. So Toussaint here, painting, and then an image of him, and then a stamp from the West African country of Benin today. And the story is that Toussaint Louverture was a descendant of a king from the kingdom of Dahomey, and today Dahomey is known as fundamentally the country of Benin. And so there's a modern era stamp commemorating and recognizing Toussaint's life in the contemporary country of Benin. Here's the second element of the international story that we want to talk about. And again, this is something that everyone here is at least somewhat familiar with. The Louisiana Purchase. The Louisiana Purchase right there. And the point here is that the Louisiana Purchase occurs in 1803. You all will recall that Napoleon will sell this huge block of territory to Thomas Jefferson, and he does that after the Haitian Revolution. Because Haiti, and you recall what Haiti looked like, it wasn't even all of the island of Hispaniola, was much more valuable than all of this because it was a sugar-producing island and one of the most prolific sources of sugar in all of the Caribbean. And so once Napoleon lost that, this area, which wasn't even inhabited yet, and the French really didn't even know what was in here, they decided, well, we better get rid of it because it is, its value has plummeted, and the Americans right next door may perhaps just invade and occupy it. And remember, this is during the course of a lull in the Napoleonic Wars, primarily between the French and the Brits. And so that's how we end up getting the Louisiana Purchase, which literally doubles the size of the extant United States, doubles the size of the U.S. And that is made possible by the successful slave revolution and slave revolt that occurs in Haiti. And now, there's an irony to this, too. There's an irony. Look here. Louisiana, Arkansas, Missouri here, all of those places become slave states. So look at what happens. The liberation of enslaved people in one place forges the shackles on African people in other places in the U.S., unfortunately. That's a cruel irony. Let's take another look at something that y'all are familiar with, the American Revolution. You know, if you were to ask the average person, what's the connection between slavery and the American Revolution, they look at you and they say, well, there's no connection. What are you talking about? The American Revolution is all about the abuse of the rights of Anglo-English people, and it's all about unfair taxes on tea and glass and so on and so forth. Doesn't have anything to do with slavery. You know, and that's what people are taught. Except we know that, for example, in the original draft in the Declaration of Independence, one of the things that Thomas Jefferson wrote there in this long series of indictments against King George III was that King George III was guilty of inciting race war in America in order to put down the revolution. And what Jefferson meant was that British soldiers and policymakers and royal governors were encouraging enslaved people to run away from their Anglo-American owners and come over to their side and to assist them in suppressing the revolution. Well, that was race war. That was race war. And of course, if British policymakers could sink to such an abysmal and low level, they could never be trusted. And white Americans would never live safely under that kind of rule. Now, as it turns out, there's only a vague reference to that set of problems and that set of issues in the final version of the Declaration of Independence. And there are a number of reasons for that. So you have to look at the original draft to really appreciate that. That's one way that slavery played a role in the coming of the American Revolution. But I want y'all to think about something else. You know, most of the African-descended people that either fight or in other way participate in the revolution support the British side. And of course, as Americans, we're generally not taught that. But that's what happened because so many people of African descent believed, and there were some ironic reasons why they thought this. They thought that their best hope of obtaining freedom was on the British side and doing something to support them. And so many more African Americans ran away from their owners, joined the British side. Some fought for the Brits. Others were laborers in fortifications and so on and so forth. Now, you know, we know all about Gadsden's Wharf, and thousands of Africans enter through Gadsden's Wharf and enter into slavery through Gadsden's Wharf. But that door swung in two directions. It swung in two directions. And most people don't know about the second direction. In other words, they know about folk who came in and entered into slavery. But guess what? After the American Revolution, there were thousands of African people who exited out through Gadsden's Wharf when the British evacuated. And thousands of those African-descended people who had supported them in one way or other left with them. And they went to various parts of the British Empire. And many of them remained free. So that door swung in two directions. And we want people to have an appreciation of that. Let me just give you these two examples, George Liele on the left and David George. And they show us, again, some of these international connections that African Americans have to the larger Atlantic Rim and the Caribbean. Both these men were born in Virginia, and they, by different means, make their way down to South Carolina. George Liele was brought down to Carolina with his owner. And David George, as it turns out, was a fugitive slave. And both of them ended up down in South Carolina. And during the time of the American Revolution, by that point, the 1770s, these men who were very religious had become ministers. And they were involved in preaching to enslaved people along the Savannah River, starting down at the city of Savannah and extending up the Savannah River. And, excuse me, and during the time of the American Revolution, they would manage to get within the British lines. And when the evacuation occurred, they would evacuate with the British. And George Liele, for example, will leave and go down to Jamaica. And he'll go down to Jamaica and will become a very important source of the Baptist religious tradition there, introducing the Baptist church. And David George would go north, ends up going to Canada, and ultimately to Sierra Leone in West Africa. So when that door swung open to freedom, you had African people who left the United States and went to other parts of the world. And in the case of these men, played prominent roles in the new communities and the new countries that they became a part of. Edward Jones, 1807 to 1865, a black Charlestonian. And Edward Jones was the son of one of the most famous black Charlestonians in the antebellum period, Jehu Jones, who was a very wealthy free black, owned, as some of you all know, a hotel down on Broad Street. Well, this is one of his sons. And Edward Jones was educated at, guess where? Amherst University. Graduated from there in 1826, one of the earliest African Americans to graduate from Amherst. And then Edward Jones, who would become a minister, leaves the United States, goes to Sierra Leone in West Africa, where he would become the first president of what eventuated in Fora Bay College, Freetown, Sierra Leone, established in 1827. And Fora Bay College is the first institution of higher education in all of sub-Saharan Africa, And he'll become the leader of that institution, which would then go on and contribute mightily to the production of a West African educational elite, many members of which would go on to do and serve in very prominent roles in terms of the development of West Africa, Western religious expansion, educational developments, commerce, and so on and so forth. Bishop Samuel J. Crowther, 1807 to 1891, was a person who would have, during the time period, have been classified as a re-captive. And what happened was Sierra Leone in West Africa became, beginning in 1808 and afterwards, the center from which the British naval squadron began to suppress the Atlantic slave trade along the coast of West Africa. And there were treaties that the British signed with various European nations, primarily to get them to end the Atlantic slave trade. And when vessels were found illegally engaged in the trade, the British intercepted those vessels and they towed them into Freetown and liberated the captives. Samuel J. Crowther was one such person who was liberated from one of those ships in the early 1820s. And so he is settled in Freetown, where he will go to school, and of course you know where he eventually goes, Fourah Bay College, and then after Fourah Bay to Great Britain, where he'll attend Oxford University, takes a doctoral degree, becomes a minister in the Anglican Church, and by 1864, he would have returned to Sierra Leone before 1864. But by 1864, he will be ordained as the first African bishop in the Anglican Church with responsibility for West Africa. And then James Africanus Horton, another prominent descendant of recaptives in Sierra Leone. He was born in Sierra Leone. His parents had been taken off of one of those illicitly and illegally slave trading vessels engaged in the Atlantic slave trade. And he'd be educated at Fourah Bay College again, and eventually goes to Scotland, attends the University of Edinburgh, and takes a medical degree there. Becomes a part of the British Medical Service in the Gold Coast, today's Ghana, and Sierra Leone. James Africanus Horton was a prolific writer also, and he was one who wrote extensively about traditional African culture and history, and also the rights of African people, the rights of African people. Remember, this time period that we're talking about, the late 19th century, was a period of rising racism internationally. And African people were being assaulted on every side and accused of racial inferiority and so on and so forth. And James Africanus Horton would write in response to those false and widespread accusations in the attempt to vindicate the historical record and the achievements of African people. Again, a product of Fourah Bay College, and the first principal, in effect, the founding principal, Fourah Bay College, has a connection to where? Charleston, South Carolina. It's an international story that we seek to tell at this museum. Let me just quickly touch on a couple of other points, and Dr. Matthews referred to the American Journeys gallery, which is this U-shaped gallery right here. The eastern part of the museum that I've been talking about is organized thematically, topically, and the American Journeys gallery is organized chronologically. So it's essentially a walkthrough of American and South Carolina history with an eye toward examining those critically important points and episodes in U.S. and South Carolina history where the African American presence had played a critically important role. And backwards, here we go. Okay, and this is what it looks like. There are the walls that comprise that U shape that I walked you through is partitioned. And there are documents, and there are images, and there are artifact cases that you can see. And as I said, it's organized chronologically. So if you're interested in the Civil War, you can walk down to a section that will be labeled probably something like 1860 to 1865 and spend your time there. Or if you're interested in World War II, it'll be similarly labeled, and so on and so forth. This is the Man Simmons site, which is up in Columbia, which is an example of a piece of real estate that was owned by African Americans in the Columbia area, dating back to the 1840s. So it begins as a property owned by free blacks and remained in the family until the 1970s. And there were several businesses that operated out of this site. George Elmore, also from Columbia, critically important in South Carolina in the struggle for the civil rights. The famous case, Elmore versus Rice, 1946, 1947, in which Elmore Rice, his attorney was Thurgood Marshall, and Elmore Rice would successfully challenge the South Carolina Democratic white primary, expanding the franchise for African Americans, not only in South Carolina, but in the nation. Dr. Matthews referred to this episode, sitting on the left, Septima Clark. And Septima Clark, as some of you all know, lost her job with the Charleston County Board of Education, ended up going up to the Highlander Folk Center in Tennessee and taught up there. That was a center that produced many labor activists, civil rights activists, and so on and so forth. And on one occasion, and the time period we're talking about is the late 50s, the late 1950s, and on one occasion, Rosa Parks on the right was her student. And Rosa said that she was just in awe of Septima, and after studying with her, she had much more confidence as an activist. And shortly after that, she rode the bus into fame. Now, okay, to bring this to a close, we know that we cannot give you the whole experience within the walls of the museum. And so we want you to come to the museum, get an orientation, see some things that are thought-provoking, some things that will pique your interest, and then we want you to go out. We want you to go out and walk through the city of Charleston. We want you to walk or drive or however you're going to get from one place to the other, take the bus, around the state of South Carolina and in the U.S., and ultimately to international locations that we'll send you to at this International African American Museum, which will serve as your point of orientation. Just to give you a few quick examples, St. Augustine, Castillo St. Marcos Fort, which has been there since probably the late 16th century. When you go down to Castillo St. Marcos, there's a timeline on that fort. And in that long timeline, it says in 1740, this fort was attacked by the British. And so you look at it and you say, well, I guess the British just woke up one morning and they said, well, we don't have anything else to do. Let's just ride on down to St. Augustine and attack the Spanish fort, right? Except we know that's not what happened. There was a series of events that led up to this, and the most critically important one was the Stono Rebellion that occurred in 1739 around the Stono River just below Charleston. And the British argued that the Stono Rebellion had been inspired by and had been called for by the Spanish authorities down in Florida. So the 1740 British attack was in retaliation for what they believed Spain had done through Florida in 1739. Now, this is an international story because it involves Great Britain, one nation, and Spain. It's an international story, and we have to think about it in that way. And there are a lot of ways in which African-American history intersected with American foreign policy. We don't normally think about that, but that's certainly correct. The African-derived community in Britain has been, well, the black presence in Britain dates back to Roman times, but that community expands dramatically in the 18th century and afterwards, and particularly after World War II, when large numbers of people of color from the British Empire migrate to the mother country there, and you will see one of the most famous ships that brings large numbers of Caribbean immigrants to Britain in 1948, the Windrush. And so those people who came in 1948 are referred to as the Windrush generation. And of course, they and those who came afterwards changed the racial and complexional face of Great Britain. And there are debates in British society today, right, in the UK today, over who is legitimately part of the United Kingdom and who is legitimately British, and if you are Nigerian, can you really be considered British? You know, the racists raise those kinds of questions. And so, interestingly enough, I mean, if you go to Great Britain today, you can take African-American history tours, Black history tours in London. This is Barbados, crop over celebration, just an example of the kind of celebratory things that happen throughout the Caribbean, you know, based on African-derived dancing traditions and so on and so forth. In Barbados, there was always a celebration after the harvest was completed, and people would go out and celebrate, dance in the streets and so on. Very, very much like, but different than Carnival, and just a continuation of that right there. These are all examples of crop over, and Dr. Matthews has talked about the Center for Family History. That's just an image of it, and I want to thank you for coming out today and for your attention. And there's our website, IAAmuseum.org, and thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Powers, Dr. Matthews. Two great presentations. Did anybody from the audience have any questions for our presenters? I can bring you the microphone.
No, George Elmore, a mulatto businessman on Hardin Street in Columbia, South Carolina, across from Allen University. He operated a fleet of cars, he operated the Carver Theater, and he had a five and dime. Now, because he was the test case to open up the white Democratic primary for Afro-Americans, the banks cut off his line of credit. George died penniless, but what he had left two daughters, and what the black teachers in Columbia, South Carolina did, and I was one of them. I taught there from 1955 to 1958. We decided every payday, I was the collector at my school, Fairwall in Greenview, we collected $5 from each black teacher, and we educated those two girls, and they graduated from Benedict College.
All the time that I've known Walter, he's never told me that story. There just wasn't an opportunity. I mean, wow. Yes, it is. It is.
Thank you. Did we have any other questions?
Anticipated opening date, or maybe month.
Anticipated opening day?
We are working towards opening this year, so late 2022. Probably about as late as I can get.
You ready? Looking forward to it opening, and since we're so eagerly awaiting Ann Caldwell, how prominently will the spirituals be incorporated into the museum?
Oh, thank you for that question. One of our major divisions is actually our faith-based initiatives. We actually have an endowed program inside of the museum led by Reverend Demet Jenkins. So we are very, very excited to be deliberately incorporating that into our work, but also in terms of telling the full and the whole story. Even our Interfaith Advisory Council has a variety. So of course we have Christian, Jewish, and Islamic representatives, but also we've got a Buddhist, we've got some Baha'i, also sort of bringing those stories, because of course African American, African spiritualism was a big part of our story as well. So yes, thank you for that.
Add to that too, the area underneath the building and the gardens adjacent are areas where it'll be possible to hear. We're in the process of determining what people will hear. And they may hear some segments of spirituals mixed in with other music, along with African languages, perhaps, and the sound of a shifting ocean. There's a variety of sounds. We're going to activate that space with sound.
And the reason I say that if there's a heaven, Esau Jenkins is there. And I tell this story all the time, and it's unbelievable. Folk can't believe it. But I graduated from Avery in 1951. There were 4 black high schools in Charleston County. Lang, east of the Cooper, ICS, Black Private Catholic School, Avery Institute, and Burke High School. In 1951, there was no black high school in North Charleston, no Barnes Wilson. There was no black high school West Ashley. So Esau Jenkins was an entrepreneur, operated buses to take blacks to the Navy Yard, bring the black women to Charleston, who worked as nannies for the rich and wealthy on the Battery. He also brought the children because their education stopped at 6th grade. So their parents used the relatives' address in the city of Charleston so they could go to Burke High School. Now, the parents had very little. Those that could afford to pay, paid. But Esau Jenkins had a vision. He approached Charleston County Council to establish a black high school west of the Ashley. And that high school was Hot Gap. The land where Hot Gap Middle School sits today belongs to the Black Presbytery of Johns Island. Presbyterians are very, very strong on Johns Island. And he was instrumental in getting the first black high school east of the Cooper. He was my friend because I took children everywhere, but I couldn't use the white state school buses. So I used Esau Jenkins, and I took my kids everywhere, everywhere. You know, it's one thing about the books, but all this history around Charleston, you put them on a bus and you take them. Well, I had a black principal who said I couldn't do it because the orders came from the white superintendent. So I found a way. I took them on Saturday. Never lost a child, 45 students, and me.
The short answer. So of course, the short answer, in addition to your story, is yes, absolutely, particularly as we talk about the Freedom Schools and Progressive Club. And then you probably already know that Reverend Demet that I mentioned is his granddaughter. Yes.
My question is, aside from memberships, how can the community get involved to support you?
Thank you for assuming that everyone here is already a charter member. Appreciate that. So I think a couple of things, of course, as you mentioned, membership, but also we also have our volunteer roles open now in preparation for opening the museum, for our extroverts and those who still love 10-year-olds and teenagers. Of course, we're going to have space for volunteer docents to actually be on the floors of the museum, but we're also a business, so also some back of house needs that we will have as well. And I would also say that we will be ongoing as we get started in terms of spreading the word about the museum and ambassadors. And as one of my team members said the other day, even this year we are beginning to launch our programs. And so another critical thing is for folks to show up for our programs. We had genealogy workshops this month. We had 4 of them. Our lowest attended one was 186 folks, so we're excited in terms of that. So I think also showing up for those kinds of things, and as you hear about the museum in conversation, talk about how excited you are and how much you would like to support. And if you feel like there's someone in your community or your business relationships that need to know more about the museum and are not connected yet, please reach out to us and them and make those connections. And on a personal note, I would say I arrived during COVID and I still have not met a lot of people. So if you were also thinking of folks to also introduce me to the community and coming out to events like this, that would also be very helpful. Yeah.
Will there be opportunities for volunteers?
Yes. So even right now, you can go on our website and one of our drop downs has volunteers. How to help us. You just fill out a little form and maybe what you're interested in. So we have some one-off things, like perhaps when we start showing up at, say, the Juneteenth festivals or do something big, you're like, I can give you a half a day. Or you may say, I can do every Tuesday, 3 to 5 o'clock. What might you need at that time? So we'll have lots of different opportunities for you. Yes. Thank you. Oh, that's Dr. Darlene Clark-Hines.
Well, thank you for those illuminating historical memories. One of the things that I want to so maybe you can help me find some more information about what was the nature of the relationships between Africans and Native Americans? Because in the South, a lot of black people claim to have Native American heritage. But in the scholarship, we don't explore any of that in great depth. And I was just wondering, is that something that you've come across?
Well, the relationship was really extensive and complex, and complex. And when I say complex, and I'm far from an expert on this, but just as an example of complexity, of course, there were some native people, let's say on the frontier of South Carolina, that held Africans as slaves. And when fugitives ran into their communities, they captured them and they turned them in. The Cherokee owned large numbers of African Americans. On the other hand, there were large numbers of African Americans that escaped southward down into Florida and integrated themselves into Seminole society and intermarried and so on and so forth, and that became an area that was really a refuge for large numbers of fugitives. Recall when before Andrew Jackson was president and he was a military officer, invades northern Florida in the 18 teens, and does so in order to try to get at the Seminoles and to begin the process that ultimately displaced large numbers of them. So there were cooperative arrangements, but there were also antagonistic relationships.
And I'll look up for you the name of our leader, session leader. The second genealogy workshop we did this month was actually African American and Native American genealogy. They both have very interesting challenges and intermixing, so I will get you the name of the woman who led that seminar because she might also be a really good source.
Thank you.
Well, let's give another round of applause. Thank you so very much. That was wonderful. I'd like to welcome now Miss Ann Caldwell. She has performed jazz, pop, folk, gospels, spirituals for the past 25 years. She is the director of the Magnolia Singers, been awarded numerous awards, received numerous awards, and written and produced many concerts and presentations. And tonight, she is going to bless us with her vocals, but also share some storytelling as well. So if you join me in welcoming Miss Caldwell.
Now, there are about 6,000 spirituals documented. And in the time that I have allotted to me, because Tanya and Bernard are a hard act to follow, in the time that I have allotted to me, I'm going to try and sing as many of that 6,000 as I can. I'm not kidding. In 1670, the English-speaking settlement along the coast of South Carolina discovered that rice would grow in the low country. But they didn't know beans about growing rice. So they used the Africans that they had brought from regions of Africa to cultivate what became known as yellow gold. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land where I'm bound. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land where I'm bound. Now, the music of the ancestors is called the spirituals. They're called spirituals because of the deep religious meanings that they hold. Now, during the growing season, the ancestors would use the spirituals to set the pace of work. When the song was sung fast, the pace of work was fast. When the song was sung slower, the pace of work was slower. And sometimes that slow pace was used when they had to rest and were not allowed to stop. Now, one of the songs that might have been used in the field to be used as a rhythm, because it's almost about the rhythm, was a song entitled Heist the Window Nora. It is a Gullah expression that means open the window. Now, the phrase is referring to a story of Noah in the Ark, Noah in the Ark. And Noah used a dove to determine whether the floodwaters had receded. Now, if the dove could not find anywhere to settle, he would come back to the ark. And Noah would open the window and let the dove come in. Yeah. Tuckle dove done flock this way. Heist the window, let the dove come in. Rain and it rainin' all of the day. Heist the window, let the dove come in. Oh, Nora, heist the window, Nora. Heist the window, Nora. Heist the window, let the dove come in. Some come crippled and some come lame. Heist the window, let the dove come in. Some come walking in Jesus' name. Heist the window, let the dove come in. Oh, Nora, heist the window, Nora. Heist the window, Nora. Heist the window, let the dove come in. Paul and Silas, they burn in prison. Heist the window, let the dove come in. For teeth and something were even hissing. Heist the window, let the dove come. Oh, Nora, heist the window, Nora. Heist the window, Nora. Heist the window, let the dove come. Oh, Nora, heist the window, Nora. Heist the window, Nora. Heist the window, let the dove come in. 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 Thank you. Now, some of the spirituals were also used as coded message songs. When they talked about freedom, the ancestors did so in code. Wade in the Water is about escaping from slavery. It means wait in the water. A successful escape was not without its perils. Even if one was able to elude the hound dogs by hiding in the nearby water, there was still the possibility of being attacked by whatever was hiding in that water. But because freedom was the most important thing on their minds, and I tell young people this, it didn't matter. That's the price that they paid in order to be free. The song makes mention of the story of Moses and the Israelite children. Wade in the water, yeah. Wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God gon' trouble the water. See that band all dressed in white. God gon' trouble the water. Look like the leader been an Israelite. God gon' trouble the water. See that band all dressed in red. God gon' trouble the water. look like the band what Moses led. God gon' trouble the water. Ooh, wade in the water. Ooh, wade in that water. Children, wade in the water. God gon' trouble the water. God gon' trouble the water. God gon' trouble the water. Yeah. Thank you. The language of the ancestors is called Gullah. It is an English-based Creole language. It's a combination of the English language and African-based expressions. I don't know why I need to do this, but I think I will. To give you some idea of what that sounds like, I will tell you a story. Do not stop me, Bernard, if you've heard it before. This is a story about two deer hunters. These gentlemen were coming together in the South to do some deer hunting. Now, deer hunting, as I understand it, goes like this. You spread out a blanket of corn cobs or apples or whatever. In this case, it's going to be corn cobs. And two or more full-grown men hide in something not much bigger than a Barbie doll house. And they wait for deer to come to the corn. And when the deer comes to the corn and nibble on the corn, they shoot the deer. Ladies, they call that deer hunting. Now, the northerner, he's from the north, he speaks no Gullah, but the southerner does speak Gullah. So they've been waiting for the deer to come, and no deer had come. So the northerner is looking to his southern deer hunting companion with a comment and a question. He says, "Sir, there are no deer coming to this corn. Are we going to have to continue waiting for the deer to come to this corn?" And the southerner said to him, "That's right." So he waits a little while longer. Still no deer come to the corn, Tanya. None. And the northerner is getting even more antsier than he was before. And again, he looks to his southern deer hunting companion with the same comment and question. "Sir, there are no deer coming to this corn. Are we going to have to continue to wait for the deer to come to this corn?" And the southerner said, "That's right." Again, they wait. No deer was coming to the corn. Again, northerner looks to his southern companion with the same comment and question. "Sir, there are no deer coming to this corn." And the southerner said, I wanted to make sure you're paying attention. He said, "I don't understand. I don't even understand why we are out here. No deer has come to the corn. In fact, a possum came along and it took about 3 ears of corn and ran off into the bush. A raccoon came by and took some ear of corn and it went running off into the bush. And what looked like 2 College of Charleston students. They didn't care about the corn, but they took the beer we had hidden in the bush. Now, you telling me we're still going to have to wait for the deer to come to the corn? The southerner said, "That's right, that's right." He said, "All right, tell me why can't we just go to another part of out here and just set up someplace else? Tell me why we cannot do that." So the southerner is going to tell him exactly why they're not going to do that. And I quote, "Da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da-da. But da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da-da." Northern looks at him and said, "Come again." So he says it to him again. "Da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da-da. But da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da-da." Northern looks at him and says, "You speak English, don't you?" The Southerner said, that's right. He said, well, tell me in English what you just said. So the Southerner translates for him. The day that the deer is there, that's the day they're not there. But the day that they are there, that's the day the deer is not there. Northerner said, hold on a minute, I think I got it. Let me know if I got this right. The day, that the day. But the day, that the day. And the Southerner said, that's right. Slavery came to the shore. I missed one. No, I like this part. I'm not going to flip too fast. Now, the way of escape from slavery was called the Underground Railroad. Now, this wasn't really a railroad, and it wasn't really underground. It was the journey from slavery to freedom. I kind of think of the Middle Passage as the journey from freedom to slavery. And the ancestors would use code words to describe the process of escaping from slavery. The code name for the make-believe train was called the chariot. The code name for Canada was home, heaven, Canaan, and promised land. The guides were called conductors, and the most famous conductor was Harriet Tubman. Her code name was Moses. Now the phrase, I ain't got long to stay here, I don't have long to stay here, does not necessarily mean dying. It could have meant that the enslaved ancestor was embarking on his or her quest to find freedom. To make that happen, one had to steal away under a blanket of darkness in order to board the chariot. Steal away, steal away, steal away to Jesus. Steal away, steal away home. I ain't got long to stay young. My Lord, He called me by the lightning, a trumpet sound within my soul. I ain't got long to stay young. My Lord, He called me by the thunder, a trumpet sound within my soul. I ain't got long to stay young. No. Steal away, steal away, steal away to Jesus. Steal away, steal away home. I ain't got long, I ain't got long, I ain't got long to stay. Thank you. Thank you. Slavery came to the shores of America around 1619 and existed for 246 years. On January 31st, 1865, the Civil War and slavery had come to an end. June 19th, 1866, was the first anniversary, was what is called Juneteenth. It's the combination of June and 19th. It's the celebration of the emancipation of Africans in America. The freedom they looked for, longed for, had finally come to meet them. But there would be still many, 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 many more hurdles to cross. I want y'all to help me with this song, because you're going to have to clap your hands. And some of y'all already know how to do that. Sing if you know it. I'm on my way to freedom land. I'm on my way to freedom land. I'm on my way to freedom land. I won't turn back. Praise God, I'm on my way. I asked my brother to go with me. I asked my brother to come with me. I asked my brother to come with me. I'm on my way, thank God, I'm on my way. I asked my sister to come with me. I asked my sister to come with me. I asked my sister to come with me. I'm on my way, thank God I'm on my way. I'll go alone if I have to. I'll go alone if I have to. I'll go alone if I have to. I'm on my way, thank God I'm on my way. I'm on my way to freedom land. I'm on my way to freedom land. I'm on my way to freedom land. I'm on my way, thank God I'm on my way. I'm on my way to freedom land. I'm on my way, freedom land. I'm on my way to freedom land. Thank God I'm on my way. I want to thank the council for calling on me. I want to thank the council for calling on me. I want to thank the council for calling on me. Oh, thank you, council, for calling on me. I'm on my way to freedom land. I'm on my way to freedom land. I'm on my way to freedom land. Praise God, I'm on my way. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yep. Some of these folks trying to pull you back. We're not going to let it happen.
Not gonna let it happen.
Thank Dan Caldwell. Marvelous, wonderful. perfectly well with the presentation by Dr. Matthews and Dr. Powers. It's part of what we want to learn, absorb with the new museum. It's not just something to look at, something to hear, something to see, something to experience, and something to share, yes, to move on beyond simply the boundaries of the museum or the Low Country here. Thank you all for coming. Very enjoyable experience. Continue to celebrate Black History Month into March, April, and beyond. It's more than 28 days each. Thanks again. Because
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah. So it would be something with
I'm not
DOT.
sure, and I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
Well, both. One could.
Permanent instead.